to the NCMU podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Mark. Here at the NCMU podcast, we are devoted to raising up and equipping the next generation of nerd culture missionaries and ministers. And today I am joined with the online pastor at Saddleback Church, Jay. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I don't feel like I'm smart enough to be on like a nerd podcast. Like I feel like I'm a fake nerd sometimes. So
I don't listen, man. I don't find that to be true. You don't have anything in your life that you would identify as making you nerdy?
No, I would definitely be nerdy. But I think the nerd, I mean, this is the conversation. Nerds are actually the new jocks. You know what I mean? So like, I don't think yes. I'm not like, I'm fake. I'm like fake smart on some of this stuff. So but I do like, I watch my own shows that people would consider nerdy in some like Doctor Who or something. But,
sure, yeah.
But I say it like that word is such a loaded word now. I think of it as like, you have to know what you're talking about. And I think I know some things, but I don't feel like I'm smart enough to be included.
Well, Bubba says from Love Thy Nerd, he always says to be a nerd, really, you just have something in your life that if you met somebody that you feel like it would be a disservice if you didn't bring up that thing with them. That's something that you nerd out about, right? And so there's certainly, I mean, let's just be real. There's people who are nerdy for sports stats, right? They're into something that's classically mainstream, but holy cow, their fantasy leagues, they nerd out about it.
Yeah.
There's some Bible nerds out there, right? And then there's me. I'm a more traditional nerd, right? I'm a live action role player and D&D player. It's, I've done the stuff that you're like,
nerd. I love that.
Yeah, that guy's never, ever getting married. Spoiler alert, I am, guys, so get off my back. Well, Jay, tell us a little bit about yourself. Help us to get to know you. Obviously, when you drop a name like Saddleback, pretty much anywhere in the church world, that carries a certain amount of weight with it, right? America's pastor, and you guys, kind of the one of the forefront churches in the seeker-sensitive movement. It comes with all sorts of different things. So just tell me a little bit about how you ended up there and what you do for Saddleback.
Yeah, so I've been at Saddleback Church here in Southern California since I interned here like in 2008 and stepped into a role on our communications team. I actually came to faith in high school at a smaller church, and then I interned at this giga church size that I actually didn't know much about. But one of my mentors came here, and Saddleback is, we have 20 locations. We're international. We have campuses all throughout Southern California, Hong Kong, and Argentina, and the Philippines, and Canada, and Germany, and really we have this like global presence. And then our founding pastor, Pastor Rick Warren, wrote one of the most popular books ever. And so with that, we're a church that always believed in digital, of course, like we were always doing stuff, but we were pretty intentional on our strategy. And so I stepped in around 2012 as the online pastor at Saddleback.
Were you alone? Like at that time, was there anybody else that carried a title like that?
Yeah, so, this is, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started, but I document some of this history a little bit in my book that's coming out here in late August. But like, it's funny because there were a lot of churches streaming that were already like had titles of like online pastor because of platforms like a church online platform. There was another platform that was very, very popular called Media Social that people were using, but these are the days of like Ustream, Justin TV, all the stuff that's pre, Twitch and all that stuff.
Sure.
And so like, there weren't a lot of us full time. I will just say there are some, the big ones like Life Church, and there's a church in Florida, Flamingo church. Like there's all this stuff that's really interesting that kind of in the history. But I was one of the early. I do know now, like friends of mine joke with me that I am the longest running online pastor.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true.
So, which one of my friends, Neil Smith, he was an online pastor at a church when we met, like in 2012, 13, in the San Antonio area called Community Bible Church. They actually owned onlinechurch.com, and
okay.
And he's no longer a lot of my friends now kind of either consult or they do other things, and it's like funny that I'm like the one that's actually still at a local church doing stuff online. But yeah, one of the first, and our church was one of the first to stream. We started streaming our services in like 2003. And I was in high school when they started streaming stuff. And so, so it's been fun watching how it has evolved and changed, especially coming out of COVID. It's such a different beast of what digital means. And churches are still, some have reverted back, some have leaned in, some have caved in or kind of abandoned it. And we're in an interesting season of churches figuring this stuff out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, COVID certainly has had a dramatic impact on both what churches are doing online, but also the voices in that space, right? Mm-hmm. There's emerged a lot of new voices in that space, and I've had the privilege to be part of a couple of groups recently, and I'm not gonna throw anything out there, but basically, the more and more I have been in this space, the more I've realized that churches are very interested, very, very interested. But many of them are a little unsure about exactly what that means still. And I would imagine, and I know that you weren't on staff yet, right, when Saddleback started live streaming, but I'm sure you, at least having been on staff for 15 years, know part of that story and that legacy. Was the origination of that sort of like, hey, because TV ministry isn't new. TV ministry has been around for a long time. Was the idea like, hey, this is the direction that broadcast and TV ministry is headed in, and so this is just the better way to do, and cheaper way, maybe less expensive way to do TV ministry?
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I was emailing one of our executive pastors back in the day, and I was also emailing Pastor Rick to fact check some of my first couple chapters on the history, because I wasn't there. And I actually heard, I tell this story in the book, that Pastor Rick, essentially, the idea was, Pastor Rick says in Purpose Driven Church that he never wanted to be a TV evangelist. He was never interested in that strategy. And we were never on TV in a regular way. Sometimes we would be, like, we did Christmas messages or something, but it wasn't like, it was never, we were regularly on TV, because Pastor Rick grew up in a kind of church planting families. Mm-hmm. And he really believed in the local church. So one of the weird things with him was, when his book went kind of nuts, he now had all these people interested in his church from afar. And the struggle was, how do we make sure those people still go to local churches while also maybe being spiritually encouraged by our church? And so digital was this thing, actually. They were very hesitant to put their services online because they didn't want people to think that was all church was just watching the stream. And so he was actually pretty anti, like, the TV ministry angle of, it is more far. I know so many churches that cut their local TV contract and they just went to streaming on, at the time, if it was like a private on their website, or if it was eventually Facebook and YouTube, because that's a smart strategy and it's a better strategy. But for Saddleback, really the main thing is that we live in our founding location in Orange County, California. We have a lot of people that travel for work. And the original vision was just, hey, like, we want people to stay engaged if they're out. And the funny thing is that the first version of this in like 03, 04, there was a password on the stream page, and you had to attend our membership class to get the password. Oh, so it was a very much like a goods and services model. Like, it was. This is like a thing that we offer you, maybe like any number of other amenities that a church would offer to somebody who's new there for the first time, whatever. We don't want you to see this as being your primary spiritual home, but we do want you to have access to your spiritual home if this is like the place that you call home, which is, Jay, what is so interesting to me is that the church is having this conversation right now, post-COVID, that's like, all that COVID's done is made it more consumeristic. And it's like, and it's acting as though this is a new conversation, right? But it isn't, right? This conversation has been around for well over a decade, maybe 2 decades now, right? Maybe the last 20 years, where the internet was becoming a thing and people were trying to figure out how do we navigate it. And maybe before that, when TV ministry was a thing, and people like Pastor Rick were also trying to navigate and say,
what does TV ministry say about the church? What does it say about discipleship? What does it say about church homes? And how do we interface and interact with that in a way that is challenging people to be connected to the local body, deeply invested in spiritual community? And at the same time, we need to deal with the fact that the world has shifted and changed. People are traveling. There's more sports on the weekends. People are more connected online than they've ever been before. And sort of, COVID was a catalyst to wake up the church and say, hey, guess what? This isn't something new. This has been around, but we're going to multiply it by whatever the number is, right? And sort of put it to the forefront of the mind of every pastor in the country, kind of at the same time. So walk me through a little bit, and maybe you've talked about this too much. How did the pandemic shift some of your, because obviously that's not, you can watch Saddleback any weekend that you want now, right? And you guys have campuses all over the world. And you're the online pastor. And you're not gatekeeping, saying you have to be a member of our campus in Argentina in order to get the Argentina code and watch the Argentina stream. It's not gate kept in the same way that it was before. So tell me about the philosophical shift about digital space and digital ministry for you guys.
Yeah, so I think there was always a vision for our church to figure out digital. And I think pre-COVID, I had staff, that I was able to focus on it. So the church believed in it. But I think pre-COVID, it was a secondary thing that I was able to kind of do, research and development on the side. And it was like they believed what I was doing was good and I was figuring something out. But I think it hadn't really trickled into, I would say, top-down strategy. I think it was the secondary thing. And it was kind of like,
you're the R&D department.
Yeah, I was the R&D department, and that gave me space to do a lot of learnings, a lot of things. And I did so much stuff pre-COVID that when we entered COVID, it was very much like we could take it to the next level. Pastor Rick said on one of our Zooms with all staff, he joked with me that I had the largest campus now. You know what I mean? And I was the pastor of the whole church, which I was like, let's not say that. That makes me want to throw up. But the thought is I think we had learned how to do, I had hundreds and hundreds of online groups on Zoom already. And all of a sudden I knew how to do breakout rooms and I knew how to handle hundreds of people on a Zoom call. Let's do it. Let's launch. And so we launched centralized Zoom groups every night of the week during COVID, the first couple of weeks of COVID, and said, hey, if you're looking for community and you're siloed because of COVID, jump into these Zooms. And we partner with all of it. We were used to it. Our team knew how to do digital training. I mean, I know how to do Zoom stuff. I know how to do all that. I have the setup. We're recording right now, and I have a nice setup in my office at home because this is what I do. I have an external camera. I have an HDMI capture card. People just, if you're streaming, you know how to do this stuff. But the normal pastor doesn't know how to do all this stuff. And so we were ready to do it. And so I think what happened is COVID was, I have a friend at a church here in Huntington Beach, California, who's actually one of my professors in seminary. And he joked with me that we met at one point during COVID. And he said, he was flirting. He says, we were flirting with digital as a church pre-COVID. COVID was like a shotgun wedding moment for our church. And now we're having to figure out, is this going to be a healthy or an unhealthy marriage? And I was like, that's totally true for most churches. And even my church, the difference with my church is that at least they had invested so much into me that I knew my church, and I could at least, now I didn't know everything my church was doing, but I could at least give some advice in some direction, and they could filter that. And then really one of the bigger changes that's happened coming out of COVID was we had our new pastor, we had our transition, and it's been awesome from Pastor Rick to Pastor Andy Wood. And Andy Wood now he's awesome, but he's also a guy in his early 40s who engages digital very different than Pastor Rick. And so him stepping in, he has this vision. So what happened was almost like there were a lot of time to figure out stuff, get through COVID and wrestle through those stages. And now we're Andy comes in and Andy's like, I believe this is an important part of where we're going. So funny things one of the early things we did, which I was just like, I've been on staff for, almost 15 years. Like we moved to a digital program in our services where like we have like printed stuff, but like we push everybody to saddleback.com/program. And now I used to every week for a long time, they would hand out a printed something in the service and I would have to get that to a Dropbox and put a link somewhere so somebody could get it if they were watching. And now it's like our whole church does this. And so that's just because like we've done the investment. And it's nothing like I did. It's just like as a church, we believe in all this stuff now. It's like, oh, people want, and this is something I say a lot to people. I go, yeah, like there's 3 audiences with digital. There are new people in your community. Yes. There are far away people that want to get engaged with you. But then I say, pastors get really excited about potential new people. And they really love the idea of somebody in another country is watching their stream. How cool is that? Like digital, like
look at our
20
reach.
years.
That's so cool. Yeah.
20 years ago that wouldn't have been possible. So, but I go, hey, your regular attenders and members, guess what? The people who tithe, the people who are in small group, the people that show up every week, guess what? They want digital options too. The same way as when you buy something and you assume it's going to have an app or some kind of deal to update. They want that. Now they still want to show up in the room, but they want that digital option. The same way as when I cancel a service, I don't want to have to get on a phone and talk to somebody. I want to be able to just log into my account. And I always tell people, I go, your regular attenders and members, like if you got to figure out what's a good digital experience for them. And this is where I think people get really distracted by the new people, or like, for example, like we were talking about, they see digital and they think these extremes, like what's happening on, VR chat or what's going on. They might have a kid or somebody that's doing something on Twitch and they're like, oh, what's this? Or what's Kick? And I'm like, yeah, like those things are awesome. And I would love to talk to you about why that thing works. But you shouldn't worry about those things right now. You just need to figure out what's something compelling for the average churchgoer and what does that digital thing. But a lot of churches, all they do is that they think digital, streaming their service, giving platform, website, some social, and it's kind of like dies there. Sure, and it's like,
absolutely.
no, there's so much more to it.
Yeah. One of the things I say a lot, like one of the we have a handful of sort of for churches, philosophical or shifts in the way that we think digital. And one of the ways is you got to stop thinking about digital as a one-way street and start recognizing it as a two-way street, right? The most powerful side of the street in digital is not that you can send your story and the story of your church, which is where most churches stop, right? It's glorified marketing in many ways, right? And then the most powerful side of the street is that you can hear anybody's story anywhere in the world, any time of the day. And if you can learn how to open up the other side, it radically changes the way that you see digital space, which is one of the things I've deeply appreciated about you and Saddleback, right? I think that a lot of churches, they fall into one of 3 categories. We talked about it, the goods and services model, right?
Yeah.
I'm basically creating a digital product for people who call us home and have a relationship with us, but can't be in the room this weekend. Or the sort of the digital evangelism model, right? Which is basically saying, hey, we're creating the best possible product we can, but go get plugged into a local church. Say what you want about Joel Osteen. One of the things that they do phenomenally well at Joel's church is, hey, we're glad that you were here, but you need to go find a Bible teaching church. Like go and find a really good church and plug into it. And then the last one is a digital church model that says, no, like we believe that you can connect here deeply, find Jesus here, be discipled, and be connected really well. And I think that what you and Saddleback have done that I think is super admirable in the digital space, which is what is happening in gaming with a high level of consistency and what I think draws people to evangelism in the gaming community, is that deep level of connection with the person on the other side of the screen that may not attend your church, may never attend your church, or may attend your church, but actually blends into the background in the physical setting, but just comes alive in the digital setting. And I think that is something where you and Saddleback have explored genuine digital ministry and digital church in a unique way that I think is really powerful, which brings me into this next one, which is you guys are in VR chat right now. And I didn't realize this. Evidently, you've personally been taking a little heat on which, whatever. There's always somebody with a gun ready to point it at a church leader that has a big church, right? And so they're always out there. I freaking love some of your stories already from VR chat. If I love the whole idea that like the church is all about going to the most remote and difficult places to go to on the planet. But as soon as it's online, we act like Jesus wouldn't have done that. And so I love that you guys are going to VR chat. It is the absolute Wild West, right? If what alt space was the totally sort of neutered version of VR is the VR chat's the Unchained, man. It's Unchained. So tell me a little bit about your experience with Saddleback and VR chat.
Yeah, so like I always tell everybody, like if I talk to a church or whatever, I go, you got to be who you got to be who you are, and you got to know who you can reach. And one of the things is, we know this being in this space for a long time, that digital is this like multiverse of opportunities. It's such a loaded word. There's so many things, the community that exists on like a Twitch versus a Reddit or a Discord versus a Telegram or WhatsApp. Like you could just go down the rabbit hole of all these opportunities. So, and that's often what paralyzes most pastors. It's like, when you say I need to think more digitally or integrate this, like, what does that mean? And so VR is one of those things that, when I remember we had somebody at our church, this was like probably 12 or 13 years ago, attended our church, and he showed up in my office and he like brought a HoloLens from Microsoft. And he showed me this thing, and I was just like, this is odd. We played a game up against the wall, which is funny now because you play this stuff on like MetaQuest 3, and it's like basic built-in features. But like, I was like, this is awesome. And I first learned about VR, AR, all that stuff, and I started to kind of see that. And, I was always interested in it. I went to VR arcades early on. I had an Oculus Go when that first came out. I never owned a Rift or any of those things, or the Vive or any stuff like that. But like, I would use them and I would be like, this is cool. Well, when I would say the consumer versions of VR started to get more popular and more affordable, I was really interested in on that. And so I just kept using it. And one of the things as I watched other people plant stuff in VR, I remember I hung out and I became friends a little bit with DJ Soto, and just hearing we were part of some like groups. And I was like, dude, you're doing it, man. Like, this is what it should do. And the thing with us was I saw some big churches get into the space. And one of my things from the beginning was, and this is my long way of saying, I didn't want to be a poser on this, like in a real way. Like, I didn't want to just stream our church service. I wanted it to work because I'm not a heavy user of VR. Like, I have been in VR a lot the last 6 months, but like, I'm not living in that world. And I know these communities like AltSpace VR, VR Chat, Rec Room, Spatial, Big Screen, whatever the heck it is, like they're their own social networks, and
people are fiercely loyal to them as well,
they're
and
so
spend
loyal.
a ton of time. I'm just going to we're going to come back to that thought in just a second. What I love about what you just said, Jay, is the same translates to Twitch, right?
I would believe so.
We've seen massive churches with tons of resources come into Twitch and not find any success because they show up and people immediately know they are not of us, right? One of the reasons that we have seen so much success on the platform and in that community is because it's my community. I spent 7 years watching Twitch and knowing Twitch. I know the microphones they use. I know the camera angles they have. I know the lenses they like. I know the lighting they enjoy. I know all of the stuff because it's me, because it's what I like. It's what I enjoy. I speak their language. So wise of you, because you're right. In COVID, I don't know if you went into AltSpace during that, but I remember going in and I looked at the advertisements, and 3 out of 4 advertisements were for a church service.
Oh,
and it was at that time, I was like, I bet you AltSpace shuts down. I bet you the church's move here without understanding the space kills the platform. And I don't know if that's the reason, but the platform's dead. It's gone. And so, and I think it is because a lot of people never took time to understand the space. They said, let's just ship what we do in our campuses or what we do at our main hub, and let's just build that out on VR. And I'm not saying anything bad about any of the churches that did that. Life Church did that. They did some really incredible stuff.
It's kind of like a modern day, like, colonizing strategy. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean that.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, and again, even in that strategy, it's like it's like a missionary going in and just teaching, let's say, a certain culture to a certain tribe. And it's like, they're doing what they only know to do. And I think it's actually funny. At one point, we explored. It wasn't during COVID. It was right before. I was trying to figure out how to get on Twitch, and I was like, we were talking because I was trying to figure out how to get our stream in. And one of the things at the time, I don't think just chatting was available. It wasn't a category that existed. I think you had to game. There was the rules early on.
Yeah.
But like the funny thing is that one of the things was I tried to talk to our middle school, high school teams about partnering with them and have them do something, and then maybe we sponsor it, because like I know enough about this, and I follow, like I watch people on Twitch, but like I like very casually watch. But I knew, like, one of the things I love about it, which everybody knows now, I mean, not everybody knows, but like you watch the chat on some of these people like streaming, and it's like it's just real time, they're hanging out, and it's so cool to watch the dialogue, and so like I'm like, that's so much better than just having somebody watch 40 minutes on YouTube a stream. And you're like, how do you do this? And so, but that all to say, what happened with VR chat was always believed in it, always wanted to do it, always kept my ears open, and we're exploring. And somebody at my church came to me and he says, dude, I build stuff in VR. Like I have a studio and I want to build this thing. And I was like, what? And I was like, that's awesome. And I said, he wanted me to pastor it. And I said, I found out he had like something like 8,000 followers on Instagram, and he has clubs, kind of like VR chat clubs in VR. And I go, no, like you're the dude. Like,
yeah.
What if you have your stuff you do and you invite people to this Saddleback space, and then I'll show up, but you are the person of peace. Like you're the one that lives in this space, not me. And we had to have a lot of conversations around like what a pastor is. And I go, you keep getting wrapped up, like, because I have the degrees and I have this title. I go like, no, man, like a pastor is a spiritual gift. It's shepherding, it's caring for people. You're doing it. I go, I'll spend the next 6 months to a year amping you up, and I'll come in and hang out. But like, they're going to know that I'm not VR chat dude. I'm the guy, you know, that's the pastor on the video or whatever. I go, I let me leverage my presence to bump you up. And so that's what we've been doing the last 6 months, is that we launched a space. And you know, we're doing it like a church plant, where it's like we launch a worship service. Now we're launching small groups during the week, and we're just slowly, we're figuring out. The one thing we're trying to figure out is what should happen in VR chat. What can we, like, for example, we teach like classes, like we have membership classes, we call them Activate. And, we teach them like every month on Zoom. And so I'm like trying to figure out like, okay, do I promote this in the VR, or are they going to want it? Because like, that's the other thing, is some people obviously live in that space heavy. Some people like live in it a little bit, and they like hang out with their friends. And so we're trying to figure out that merge right now, but it's working because we have this amazing leader who was already a influencer in the space. And he's like, I just want to do church. And I was like, dude, let me come alongside. And so I always joke, we were joking around it with like, there's a couple people that like these haters online like picked it up, and somehow I'm like the VR chat dude, and they're like quoting me, and I'm like laughing because like I'm like, yeah, like I have my like next to me, like I have my Quest 3, you know, but even that, like normal, like if you're, I know like a Quest 3 is a, I know they're nice devices now and they're getting pretty nice. I go, but they're not like as high end as some, like they're not, like I'm still kind of the entry level dude. And so like it's funny like to now be like a face of a VR chat to some church leaders, where like I'm not even like a deep dude. I believe that people are underplaying. If you project out the next 10, 25 years, this stuff is going to be super integrated. And you know, there's that famous you know, like there's that famous clip that goes around online about, it was like 1993, where everybody, it was Burger King was going to take credit cards, and like everyone's like, why would I ever use my credit card to pay for a fast food meal? And it was all this hate. Sure. And now it's like, duh. And I think we're going to have that moment with VR and AR and all this stuff, where like, yeah, you're going to go to work and you're going to do this and you're going to hang out, and you know, and that change. I'm old enough, I'm in my late 30s, that I've seen, you know, like when I got on Xbox Live was a big deal, but I played by myself with other people. And then people a little bit younger than me, what I saw is that they game with their friends. I didn't really get to game with my friends because how old I kind of missed that stage. But like my kids now, I have 3 kids. We live next to like their friends too. Like they'll play Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft. They'll FaceTime each other. They'll be like 5 feet apart. They have 5 people, and to them, this is normal. Like
absolutely.
they hang out, and I'm like, I have my youngest is 7, my oldest is 13, and they all play Roblox together, and they're FaceTiming, talking, and it's funny because like 20-year-old Jay would have been, that's the coolest thing ever, but to them it's a normal, Friday afternoon, you know what I mean? And so if you project out, I think VR is it's gonna go, and this, but like people can't see it because they're like, oh, it hurts my eyes. It's like, and it's.
I have to put that thing on my head.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's. I was just watching it. Last thing I'll say, this is really funny. I was watching a documentary last night on Walt Disney, and they were talking about how he was visiting in Germany. Not Germany. He was visiting somewhere like I think in France, and it was before Snow White came out, the full animation, and nobody had done a full animation. And they said in the documentary, which I hadn't heard this before, they said he was doing these like his business was doing these like 5-minute clips for movie theaters for animation, and the hate is that you couldn't do a full feature animation movie because it would ruin your eyes.
It would destroy them. Yeah, you would go blind.
And it was funny because it was like a joke, obviously, and it was just hate. And I was like, oh, it's funny how that's how people talk about VR now. Like you can't stay that long, and it's like funny because and obviously they have to get the lens quality, and it's going to get there, but it's going to take some time. But it's just funny how these conversations change. And I think this is the thing. Churches just don't, like, I love the church forever. I have this thing, like, one of the most amazing things is that we've preserved for 2,000 years, but part of that preservation is that we don't change quickly. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, that's the tension. It's the pro and cons of some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, you touched on another one of the sort of the philosophical shifts that I talk to churches about a lot, which is that the internet has impacted generationally brains differently. And so people who were fully formed brain-wise, and then the internet came about, interact with it in a very specific way. And people like you and I'm 36, right? So I was going through a great deal of formation when I remembered getting the internet and dialing in.
Yeah.
I immediately split my personality and I created a dualistic lifestyle. Immediately, I had a person that I was online and a person that I was in person, and they were 2 different people. And so I'm hybrid, but I'm dualistic in my thinking about online space. I still think of them many times as 2 different zones. My daughters, who will swim in it, right? My daughters are 7 and 4. They were born into a world of high-speed internet. They will never know. It's a force of nature for them. And so their brains are impacted differently than boomers and Xers. It's impacted differently than millennials. And Gen Z are amongst that group of my daughters. I think they're alpha. And so what's interesting is the thing that has shifted, I think, is they are hybrid but holistic rather than hybrid and dualistic, which means they're hybrid. They merge in between digital and physical seamlessly, but they don't recognize it nearly as often, right? They don't see these are my relationships online versus these are my relationships in person. They recognize there's a difference there, but they walk between those worlds seamlessly. And you were mentioning about VR, you not be like, hey, I have the Quest 3, and it's like, great, you can buy that thing at Walmart, right? There's people in my context, in my church, they have the full vest, right? They have the gloves with all of the sensors and everything, then they can feel all the stuff. And I think very specifically, there's a guy in my small group, and if you were to ask him about his day-to-day life, he works at Home Depot part-time. He's struggling through life. He has a handful of different things that are going on. And if you would ask him about his day-to-day life, man, he would not have a whole lot to share that he would be excited about. But if you were to ask him about his presence in VR, the leadership that he has in that space, the friends that he encounters, the time that he spends there, the relationships that he developed, he would absolutely come alive. And that's because there is a great portion of his life that is experienced and lived in VR chat. And I'm sure that you guys have had the crazy experiences. And one of the things that I love, because this is very common about my space as well, right, in Twitch. And they're like, does the church, should you, like, Twitch is full of debauchery. Should you be there, right? Or isn't it a hard place? Is it really good for people? And I'm like, well, listen, would you plant in New York City? Would you plant in the red light district in any one of the European cities? Would you go to the slums of India and think that the people in the slums of India deserve a church? Would those places be hard? They absolutely would. Does that mean the gospel shouldn't have a presence in those spaces? Absolutely not. We would encourage, highlight, man, we would platform people who wanted to go to the toughest places to do missions work and plant churches. But as soon as the church wants to go into a place that we're not really theologically sure how we're supposed to handle and we have no experience in, it's very easy to cast stones. Say, you shouldn't be in VR church. Don't you know there's people who are scantily dressed in their avatars there? It's illegal. The church has no place in a place like VR chat. And, welcome. If your haters are listening to this podcast, feel free to toss some my way as well, because we all get to answer to Jesus one day for the stuff that we put out there. That's all I'm going to say. So I freaking loved it. I love what you're doing.
Well, it's funny because it's like I was texting right before we started this with our mutual friend Jeff Reed, but he was like joking around with me, welcome to VR, about some of these stories. And I'm with you, man. Like, I understand, like, because of my personality, like, I understand where people get, like, they're kind of this protective, like, they want to hold on. And I think there's this old, I think, thought that, it's kind of like the good old days were back then. And I always joke with people, especially in the United States, because I've been born and raised in Southern California. I always joke with people when I visit, let's say in the South or something. I go like, I'm from the future. Like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Yes,
I'm a time traveler.
You might have friends and teachers and stuff that believe different things, that date people different than maybe you're used to. And guess what? You're going to all get along. Like, it's normal. I go, it's no big deal. And you're going to have to learn to not just hope somebody, and I always use the example, like, I don't think back in Jesus's day, they just hope people showed up to a synagogue. I think Jesus met people at the well, and he went to the places and he hung out. And It's just that idea of thinking that, there is that fear that you're losing this thing. And that's what a lot of the hate for a long time around digital has been is, no, we want people to come to our building and we want this. And the irony is that, the church thrived before there were buildings, but once we got buildings and freedom, it became a different type of, sacred cow in a way. And like, people have to experience it by coming here. And that's not the point. And the irony is that that's what the Jewish people did, right? Originally, it was like, be a blessing to everybody, but then they held it to themselves. And we're kind of doing that with our buildings in a way where, like, you only can experience God here and you have to act a certain way to come here. And I think I get excited, like, we have the craziest things happen in these VR chat services, that people wearing random avatars and doing all sorts of stuff. But that the same thing happens I remember the first time this happened when we started to really embrace YouTube. And this was a long time ago, and people would say comments, and I would get a text from somebody, and it would be like, Jay, somebody made this comment on YouTube. And I'm like, yeah, that's what YouTube is. I go, Twitter and all these places are usually just great for dunking on people. It's just what it is. I go, but like, we have to choose. I think we can have a conversation here. And it's just funny because people got all scared, and I'm like, are we not thick-skinned enough? Don't we know who we are? Like, we got to be okay. Just because there's a comment that lives here, yeah, we'll remove it. That was the other thing that, like, sometimes early on, like, people didn't understand, is that, like, something would happen on Facebook, YouTube, and whatever it was at the time, and we wouldn't catch it quick enough. And I'd be like, this thing never shuts down. Like, it is there. Up always. And so you, like, are trying to think that, like, we missed it, but it's up 24/7. And yeah, we sleep sometimes. And it's just like, yeah, somebody may comment something at 3 a.m. and they live in Indonesia, and I got to figure out, you know what I mean? And it's like, now today I have volunteers in these countries, and so they help, the counter. But it's just, yeah, like, it's just different. And I believe the church is going to continue to thrive, and I believe Jesus is going to win in this. I believe, even crazy thought, that I don't necessarily think the world's ending in the next 100 years. I think we may even continue to thrive, and and I think digital is going to be one of those things. It clearly is doing crazy things. And so, like, I get excited about. But on the flip side, and this is where like I also believe deeply in the physical expression of church. And so I have this hybrid, belief that both is really important. And so I always like, I always tell people like, yeah, like, I always use the example of marriage that, my wife and I have been married, coming up on 16 years, and like we do life near each other for a reason. And I think there's something to that, but to act like our relationship is dormant when we're not near each other is dumb. And to think that we don't have a good relationship when we're sending random reels and TikToks and memes to each other throughout our day, laughing about stuff. Like, we're still connected even when we're far apart. And I think the church needs to think about that. You can have both now, but at the same time, digital can cause frictions in a marriage. And so it's like, you got to know how to use it. And so it's this.
Absolutely.
And so like, I use that illustration a lot, just thinking through churches, like, don't think of it as competitive. Think of it as integrated, and think through it strategically beyond just, streaming a service somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. We say a lot, like if you're a church and you preach, you hope that the congregants don't go home and act like morons on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? You hope that your physical presence transforms their digital life. And we're doing the same thing. It's just our digital presence with them is transforming physical life. And, if you're out there, I think this is applicable to the NCMU listeners, but also to pastors. If you send an email to your staff member and say, hey, I want you at this meeting, and then they don't show up, and they say, oh, that was an email, that's digital, it doesn't count. You wouldn't see that as a really valid response, right? And in the same way that, FaceTiming with your grandkids during COVID, those conversations that you have aren't invalid just because they happened over a camera. And therefore, the presence that you have with people isn't invalid. Although, a lot of the church has fallen into hey, we're upset that people are consumeristic online. And the truth is, we just take the thing that is the most consumeristic thing that we do, and it's the only thing that we offer a lot of times. Now, what I love of what Saddleback has done is the opposite. You're like, no, we have hundreds of relationships tied together, thousands even, through small groups. That's been something you guys have done from the beginning. And that is something that has been so true of people in the Twitch space. Is the reason that people are drawn into the missional space of Twitch is not because it's a place where they get to broadcast their story and let people consume stuff. They're creating content, but they create content for the purpose of connection. And people get to know their communities. The same people come into their streams. They pray for those people. They connect with them deeply. They establish relationships. They hang out and game with them when they're not streaming. They get to know them through their Discord communities. And they're these people who they don't know. And now we're seeing stories of people, they're being discipled, people being baptized, people connecting to groups, people having their lives radically and forever shifted and changed by people. And I could go into it until I was blue in the face with the people that we've seen have deep life transformative impact that I've never met in person through our church at Lutz. And so, but I want to land the plane here soon. So I would love, and I know that you don't have the most thrilling day ahead of you, so maybe you would want a podcast for another 3 hours. But you have a book coming out, Jay, with a provocative title, Online Church is Not the Answer. It's coming out in, you said August.
Yeah, late August. But we're prepping and getting stuff ready. You're prepping and getting stuff ready for it, of course, for the release now. So tell us a little bit about this book that you have coming out and why people should be picking this up that are in like the Twitch and gaming space. Yeah, so I was joking with you before we started recording that I've been editing my my audiobook version. So I'm in purgatory of just listening to myself over and over again. And I have sympathy for my wife now having to listen to this voice over and over again. So I, again, was when I got hired as the online pastor in 2012. I've gone through stages of just development and learning, and I've talked to churches all around the world, trained churches all around the world. And I've seen big, small churches figure this out and not figure it out. I've gone through the hate stages, the love stages, the irrelevant stages. And I've been able, because of my church and the blessing of that, to get like really a doctorate in digital ministry. And I believe in it. And half the time when I'm talking to churches, I'm like, I wish I could just change your mind on like your perspective. You just have like, I get where you're coming from, but your perspective needs to like just shift a little bit here. And so really this book has been like a little bit of a manifesto of how to think about digital ministry as a church leader. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was I have I can't hang out and get coffees and do conversations like this with everybody because I'm constantly getting asked to do stuff, hang out, help a church of all sizes. And it was like, how do I narrow this down? And so I started to write this book actually like about 4 years ago. And I just slowly started to think through it from the average church perspective. And and so the idea is that online church is not the answer. Subtitle is beyond just streaming church to hybrid disciple making. And so really, if you look at a lot of churches, they think of it as online church, this separate thing. Yep. It's really online church has become this branded church online platform, YouTube streaming, Facebook streaming. A lot of churches, if it was pre-2000, let's say 13, 14, what happened was if you were streaming church services, it cost you a lot of money because you had to pay for the bandwidth. When Facebook became free for live, a lot of churches jumped on it. And then all of a sudden they just turned on a stream. And I am coming from a perspective of think beyond just putting something up and giving. And really, I talk about this idea in the book, and I think this is why the value of the book, and I'm really excited about it. But the objective of your church is not to get people in the room and tell them to do something. The objective is to produce spiritual fruit. And so the question is, can digital aid you in that objective? And most pastors and church leaders are trained in seminary. They go to physical seminary. I have a seminary degree from a reputable school. I loved my seminary experience, but I would drive there, get there, be told what to do. And then what happens when I do ministry, I replicate the experience. And so digital now, it's like, wait, I don't have to be in the room. And it's like, wait, no, your job, your programs that you do, worship services, disciple, all this, is the goal to just get a bunch of warm bodies in the room, or is the goal to help them be a better husband, a better wife, a better dad? And, and the last thing I'll say is that I use this example in the book, this idea that we had a parent ministry here, and we put on this big event on Saturday morning to help parents at our church, and the event bombed. And one of the reasons why it bombed was, guess what? We're asking them to be there on Sunday, to be in a small group, to serve. They're also parents. They're doing, maybe coming on a Saturday morning isn't the best use of their time. And what they did was, this wasn't something I did, but the church did, they pivoted that to a podcast strategy. And it's a very simple thing. Not everything is a podcast strategy. Podcasts are super popular right now. But what I like about it is maybe they don't need to be in a room to become a better parent. Maybe doing a podcast once a month, a 30-minute conversation, is actually a really good execution of that ministry. And then the thought is with the book is, think through integrations at all level. So what is your objective, and what does healthy digital integration look like for your kids ministry, for their singles ministries, for your small group ministry? So it's healthy digital integration for your kids ministry doesn't mean you stop your kids programming, but maybe it means you text your parents in your church on Sunday, hey, by the way, we talked about this, and this is how you should talk to your kids this week. It doesn't mean you got to be on Rec Room, but here's a simple integration. So my attempt with the book is really and actually what I do, and I'll say this for these listeners, because everybody who's part of this community is going to be a little bit more digitally savvy. My cover is it's red tape. It says online church not, and it's not is in red tape. And what I do with the cover is if you pull off not, it says online church is the answer.
Oh, okay.
And so it's I'm kind of subtly saying, I'm trying, and really I wrote the book to change. I'm trying to onboard and change the mind of the average church leader. Believe in the potential of this. And the book is a little bit of a provocative, I'm trying to stir up, but that's my intent with the book. We'll see what happens, but I'm very excited for it.
I'm excited for it too, Jay. And, as a digital church planter and somebody who has really in the last year, maybe 18 months, has had a lot more opportunity to speak into the life of the church as a whole and begin to challenge some of our preconceived thoughts post-COVID of what digital is and what it should be. I highlighted a couple of here during this podcast, but I have maybe 4 or 5 sort of philosophical shifts that the church leader needs to make to properly understand the power and the opportunity that exists inside of digital. And spoiler alert, also, they have nothing to do with what streaming software you use or, what place you're brought. And that's the most question. And I'm sure you've experienced that. That's the primary question. When people think about digital, their number one question is, what platform should we be on?
Yeah.
Or what software do you use to do it? And the questions about why you're doing it start way, way, way before you get to what platform that you're on and how you communicate properly on that platform. If you're listening in today, guys, I hope that you've been able to pull something helpful for your own ministry, your own life, as you've been considering, or you are currently in nerd culture ministry in some capacity. And whether that's gathering your friends around a board game table or having a Bible study and conversation post D&D game, or you're getting into live streaming right now and you're trying to figure out how to communicate best with the people that you're ministering to through your Twitch stream or your Kick stream or your YouTube stream, I hope that there's some of the things that Jay has said from a decade and a half of online ministry. I would arguably say as well, the person who has been in it the longest, the most tenure, possibly globally, to be perfectly honest with you. You might be kind of like the premier, most tenured person. And I know that maybe that makes you, maybe you like that, maybe you don't like that. But the truth is, in the end of the day, Jay, time in something just allows you to make more mistakes and have turned from those mistakes and learn from those mistakes. You have more opportunities to do that than anybody else that I know, possibly anybody else on the planet. And that is so incredibly valuable. Because, I mean, let's just be honest, books that are written, videos that are shot, information that's being passed down is mostly being passed down by people who have had the opportunity to make mistakes, and then they get to tell the next people, hey,
agreed,
here's some mistakes you shouldn't make. Right?
Yep.
And so I so deeply value your wisdom and input and really appreciate your time spent with us today on the NCMU podcast. Thanks for coming by and hanging out with us and just sharing with us.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Lastly, where can people find the book that you have coming out in August?
Yeah, I should have pre-orders very soon, but you can go to jaykranda.com. I'll have something up there as soon as I get out of purgatory of editing and everything.
Awesome. Go check that out, guys. Thank you for listening to the NCMU podcast, and we'll see you back here on the next episode.